Hey everyone. It is really interesting to be the final speaker at any conference. From one side, I'm kind of fucked up because everybody before me was so amazing that the bar is really high and I'm really bad speaker, so you're going to kind of realize this. On the other hand, if I slightly mistimed my 260 slides, there is nobody after me. So I guess nobody is going to complain. At least I hope so. So, that's my name. The majority of you probably cannot really read it. So it has a different version, which the majority of you probably cannot pronounce. My friends call me like this, but you probably can't read it. And it has another version that most of you pronounce as bozo. I really hope I'm not a bozo. So, my really good friends call me Bug, and they have been calling me Bug for many, many years, long before I became a software engineer, so presumably this has nothing to do with the quality of my work. If you look at the issue trackers of my open source projects, maybe that's not kind of true, but yeah. I know that I sound like a Russian hitman, but I'm actually from Sofia, Bulgaria, so if you ever want to obtain this kind of Russian accent, just live for 33 years in this magical city, which maybe some of you remember from last year's EuRuKo. I know that many of you are depressed that EuRuKo is ending, and I hope that many of you have fond memories from your time in Sofia, so I'd like this opportunity to announce a brand new Ruby conference. Ruby might be dying, but the family of Ruby communities is growing. The very same team that brought you EuRuKo last year in Sofia is starting a new conference, Balkan Ruby. It is going to be a traveling conference on the Balkan Peninsula. We don't have just wars there and kidnappings and mafia and so on. We also have Ruby developers. So join us again in Sofia next year. It's going to be a lot of fun, and we have a lot of rakia and a lot of Bulgarian grill. So it's going to be very, very awesome. A deep and profound experience, if you will. I work at TopTel, and for us it is an honor to be supporting the event once again. TopTel is built on Ruby. We have been very, very grateful to Mats, to the core team, to all the open source contributors, because they made it possible for us to build a successful, useful business, and we are very glad to be able to give back to the community. And I'm really proud to call this man, who was the best speaker at the conference, a colleague. Victor was so awesome that I'm really, really nervous right now. I plan to do like him, but the problem is that if I'm silent for 40 minutes, probably it's going to look a bit weird. Okay, I do open source. Maybe you know this, maybe not. I'm very obsessed with writing good Ruby code, good Ruby on Rails applications, even though I kind of despise Rails, but I love the language. I wrote a very evil tool, and I know that a lot of people hate me. I'm on the Emacs team, and I'd like to remind you that Emacs is the one true editor that is going to bring balance to the source and is going to appease the ever-complaining Robocop. I wrote another project for another conference, but that doesn't matter. What matters is that I'm really, really excited to be here for a multitude of reasons. Number one being that last year I was also supposed to be here, but ended up there. This is a Bulgarian hospital. I got very sick on the day of the conference, so sick that I was about to die, literally. They told me, sign this paper for an emergency surgery or you die. I asked, do I have the option not to sign? Well, if you want to die. So yeah, this year the organizers were kind enough to invite me again, so I could share with you what I was supposed to share last year. And what happened to me is in the past. Now we are going to talk about the future. The future of Ruby. Wow, sounds good, right? And I know what some of you are thinking. What is this guy going to tell me about the future of Ruby? After all, he's not on Ruby's core team, he's not on Rails's core team. As a matter of fact, he's not on any core team. Doesn't seem very competent to be talking about the future of Ruby. Actually, at the speaker dinner, somebody told me, "You look kind of young. I expected that you would be old and wise because you're going to speak about the future of Ruby." And then I decided not to shave until the conference. So I have been really interested in the future of Ruby because, as I told you, I love the language and I wanted to have a future. So at several conferences, Matt says that the target date, the ETA for Ruby 3.0, are the Summer Olympic Games in Tokyo in 2020. Afterwards, he revised this estimate as overly optimistic. So I believe that right now nobody knows when Ruby 3 is going to happen, but one thing is certain, it's not going to happen anytime soon. On the conferences recently, Mats has been saying things like Ruby is now mature, which is great. He has been saying that he and the core team are aware of all of the mistakes they have done. But because compatibility is very important, which is true, it's very hard to fix those mistakes, which sucks. He has been saying things like, Ruby has survived for 24 years, which from one side sounds kind of good, but survived is a word with a very negative connotation. It seems that right now, Ruby's only aim is to survive. And I really want the word that Mats is using to be thrive. Ruby has thrived for 24 years and is going to thrive for many, many more years. Mats also said that there are very few tools that have survived so long, so you should bet on them. And I believe he was trying to tell you that the only editors worth using are Vim and Emacs. But that's just my interpretation of his words. I might be mistaken. Mats has also been saying things like, people are still making a living with Ruby, so probably they shouldn't be complaining if something sucks. But I can tell you that people are still making living with Kobo. And you know what? It pays really well to be a Kobo developer because nobody wants to touch this shit. Mats has also been saying some other very inspirational things like, we need to build the things your users need, meaning his users, instead of the things they want. And of course, he quotes Henry Ford, just like anybody else. You know this quote. But I believe that when you're making such bold claims, with which I disagree in principle, you also have to have a proven track record of innovation. You really have to have delivered to us the things we needed but didn't know we need. So let's see the track review, the track record of recent Ruby innovation. I'll start with Ruby version 2, and by Ruby, I mean the language, the language that we all fell in love because of its simplicity, beauty, the ability to express our thoughts into something that is readable, unlike Java, as somebody mentioned earlier. So for me, this is the essence of Ruby. MRI, that's something in the background. Whether it's fast, slow, we want it fast, but I don't really care that much. I care about the language, because for me, this is what Ruby is. So let's see. Ruby 2, what happened there? The innovation. Keyword arguments. This was very useful, although it was at least 7 years overdue. Literal syntax for an array of symbols. I really don't know who comes up with those features. I really don't. But I believe that at least somebody on the core team really wanted to see this happen. UTF-8, sorry. Bulgarian leakage. UTF-8 is now the default source encoding. Great change. 12 years overdue. Refinements. An experimental feature which nobody really wanted, nobody asked for, but it seems we really needed it. Ruby 2.1, rational and complex literal syntax. Kind of useful, but 99.7% of the people don't really use this. Devs now return a value, very, very useful. Refinements are no longer an experimental feature. Well, still nobody cares about them, so. Ruby 2.2, absolutely nothing. Ruby 2.3, frozen strings literal pragma, very important addition. A way to string literals and I hope strings becoming immutable down the road. Safe navigation operator, highly controversial feature that really promotes writing code that nobody understands. Squiggly here docs, that's one of my favorite additions in Ruby in recent years, and this wasn't even mentioned in the release announcement. I accidentally found out about it. So the Ruby team really needs somebody to write proper release announcements. Ruby 2.4. Unify fixed num and big num into integer. Most people probably wouldn't notice this, although it's a nice change. Support Unicode case mappings. 8 years overdue, very useful. Ruby 2.5. When I was working on this talk, I asked myself, what do I know about Ruby 2.5? The answer was nothing. So I opened the changelog and I just copied the language changes from there. Top level constant lookup is removed. Seems kind of vague. I know what this is, but I don't think you can understand it. Some other somewhat useful features like rescue ensure are allowed inside do and blocks. This is pretty cool. Refinements take place in string interpolations. Still nobody cares. I'm deeply convinced that at this point, Java innovates more than Ruby. And that's not an empty statement. If you take a look at the epic changes that happened in Java 9 just 3 days ago, there are projects that suffers from way more compatibility constraints than Ruby, and they still find ways to address some issues from the past, to push forward and to push at a really rapid pace. Java announced that starting from 3 days ago, they are going to release a new major version every 6 months. And this is supposedly the most enterprising project in existence, but they can do it somehow. And the other thing that really bothers me is that Ruby is so dominated by Rails. Let us take a look at the changelog for Ruby 2.2 and count the number of times Rails appears there. Once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times. Is this normal? It seems that everything that happens in Ruby happens for the sake of a web application framework. I know that probably all of us here are Rails developers, but I really do believe that it's not normal for a single framework to be controlling the fate of a programming language. And I'd really like to encourage everybody to take a look at Trailblazer, Hanami. There are alternatives, people. Look around. There. But what about Ruby 3.0, the future? I promise that this talk is actually going to feature programming code. I know that it's very uncommon for Ruby conferences, but brace yourself. So, what do we know? We don't know anything. At least we don't know anything concrete. For instance, for a while, there was talk that Ruby 3 was going to feature optional static typing. This has been officially rejected. Now there has been some talk about duck inference. I won't go into any details about this because Mats made some really good talks on the subject. I think that this is a really good idea, but at some point somebody should tell us, is this happening or it's going to be rejected in 2 years? Better support for concurrent and parallel programming. For a while it was really unclear what's happening there. Lately it seems that guilds are the way to go. I'm really divided when it comes to guilds. I'm not going to say much about them. Basically that's a way for us to get real parallelism and not remove the geo. So it's a compromise to make progress, which is okay. That there are many excellent talks on the subject. Take a look. You decide whether this is the approach, the good approach or not. 3 times faster performance. Until yesterday, I had absolutely no idea how this was going to happen, because every time Mats just mentioned it and pressed next on the slide remote. So I just assumed that he has it under control. So MJIT seems to be the way. There are presentations about this. I guess everybody heard Mats's. He also mentioned that we are getting rid of some quirky language features, but he never mentioned which exactly. And I have some ideas. And he many times said that we should not be repeating the mistakes which Python 3 made, the mistakes that JavaScript 4 made, and PHP 6 made, although comparing Ruby to JavaScript and PHP is something really worrisome to me. But I'm now a nicer person, so I'm not going to push this further. Anyways, I do remember some other mistakes that are not really discussed, like the development of Perl 6, which took so many years that by the time that Perl 6 was announced, there weren't Perl developers around to be excited about the release. Just some food for thought, nothing more. Mats also asked who said that Ruby is dead. Well, just 2 days ago, I was at another conference, and the keynote was Ruby is dead, by the prominent and very deep and profound gentleman Nick Sutterer of Trailblazer fame. Nick was so certain about this that he even tattooed this on his neck and started selling t-shirts to fund the development of Trailblazer. Just saying. Mats asked, I felt obliged to answer. And now I'm going to do the one thing that everybody teaches you about the presentation, that is the worst thing, and the worst presenters do it because I'm one of them. Put a lot of text on a slide and read it slowly to the audience. I believe that it's okay if this is something written by Zach Tellman, and it is deep and profound, because everything deep and profound goes. There has been a consistent migratory pattern from Ruby to Node.js to Go to Rust and Elixir. At first, each community is defined by its potential, but as that potential is realized, the community begins to be defined by its compromises. The change is felt most keenly by the people who are there first, who remember what it was when anything seemed possible. They feel fenced in, and so they move on in search of their golden city. I don't know about you, but it seems to me that this describes the situation in Ruby so perfectly in recent years. And don't get me wrong, I know that the stewardship of a major project like Ruby is very, very hard. There are a lot of trade-offs, a lot of considerations to be made. I heartily recommend to everybody to watch the talk Stewardship, the Sobering Parts by the chief architect of Java. That's one of the best talks that I have ever seen in my entire life. And it really sheds a lot of light on how hard it is to make decisions to evolve a very mature project and how many people are going to be upset by any decision. So, you know, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. It's tough. But that being said, let's make Ruby great again. I'm starting my actual presentation now. In the typical style of Ruby, I'd like to introduce a new concept for the future of Ruby, because I don't think that Ruby 3 is adequate for our needs. So, let's assume that there is a secret team of highly skilled developers working on this project that actually has a cool code name, Buzz, because, you know, Buzz Lightyear can take us to infinity and beyond. And let's say that they even have a very concrete idea about what this future version of Ruby should be. First of all, yes, Ruby 4 is going to be 4 times faster than Ruby 3, which means it is going to be 12 times faster than Ruby 2, which means that Ruby 4 is finally going to be fast enough. Although it is probably still going to be slower than JRuby, so adopt JRuby today. Now let's focus on the language, or the language and its standard library, if we have time for it. We are guided by several design principles because every good language designer should have principles, ideally more than one, and they should ideally follow those principles. And you saw the team, highly skilled people. Continue to optimize for happiness. So what this means in practice, add some useful new features to the language. We have a few ideas. Number one, immutable data structures that are very well integrated in the language. We are going to have vector, which is basically an immutable version of array. It is going to have the following immutable syntax, and there is going to be an API to seamlessly go back and forward between arrays and vectors. So there will be no real breakages. You just get more stuff. We're going to get immutable hashes. They're going to look like this in their literal syntax form. We're going to get immutable sets. And maybe more importantly, we are finally going to promote sets to a first-class data structure in Ruby. Right now, they're just part of the standard library. So that's why nobody in Ruby uses sets. And people are using arrays for what is a perfect use case of set arithmetic. So I believe that by promoting sets to a first-class data structure, as in most programming languages, we are finally going to show many people the light. This is going to be awesome. More details incoming. Static typing and runtime contracts without breaking anything. There is a little-known project, RDL, which is really cool, and we believe that they are on the right path to solve our problems with Ruby. We are going to introduce type annotations for methods, which look like this. You're basically going to be able to specify the types of the parameters and the type of the result. This is something that you can add, or you cannot add. This is something that can be disabled globally in the runtime. So if you disable it, no overhead at all. Usually you would want to use this enabled in development, in a staging environment, but you would want it completely disabled in production. It supports some really fancy things like precondition, postconditions. It supports very complex definitions for the inputs and outputs of a method. For instance, you can say that something is a float and it's a positive number, and that the output is also a float and it's a positive number. And I believe that this is pretty cool and adds a ton of value to your code. Completely backwards compatible, doesn't break anything. Better concurrency APIs. Yes, we can do something like guilds, but I really don't think that our issue is performance most of the time. As Matt said himself, threads are very hard to use in general. So what we need is a better API to deal with concurrency overall. And we don't need to come up with something new. That there has been many languages experimenting with this for many years. I say, let's just pick some of the best ideas around. We have this project, Concurrent Ruby, even today. They provide a lot of concurrency primitives for Ruby. And I believe that probably the best approach that we can adopt today is communicating sequential processes, made really popular by Go, that then promoted even further by Clojure and friends. So we are going to add to Ruby an API looking more or less like this. Unfortunately, due to time constraints, I cannot go into many details, but you can just check out the awesome documentation of Concurrent Ruby. I believe that we really just have to follow up with things that we know are good, that people like, and that are practical, useful, and proven. No need to experiment further. And because Charlie challenged me to come up with more new features for Ruby 4, we are going to add something which I call namespaces. And this is the biggest change to the language since iPhone 7. So instead of writing, imagine this situation. You have two nested classes. You want to nest a module inside. Normally, you would do it like this, but it looks kind of strange. You can do it like this, but it also looks kind of strange. What if there was some magical syntax that didn't really care if A and B were classes, modules, whatever, that allowed you to nest perfectly and just did the right thing. Well, that's namespaces for you. Available November the 3rd. You can pre-order them today. Pattern matching. Yes, we're going to have this because all the Elixir developers are bragging about this, and we cannot stand it anymore. Ruby deserves pattern matching, but the API is still to be decided upon. And because I've noticed that Ruby developers never deprecate anything, especially in Ruby core, we are going to add a deprecation API to make it really easy for them to move progress forward. The deprecation API is going to look more or less like this. Right now, the most common way to deprecate something is to use gem deprecate, the module, and the deprecate method that comes from this module. We are going to just promote this to module itself. So you're going to be able to use something like an annotation if you want. Deprecate, replacement method, version, whatever. There are going to be many supported parameters. This is going to issue beautiful messages that prompt developers to swiftly update their code and go forward to the future. And because from time to time we make really epic mistakes and we want to deprecate entire classes, well, we are going to support this as well. Really, really cool feature. We have more design principles. Design principle number 2, simplicity. Because simplicity is the ultimate sophistication, and saying this makes me sound very sophisticated. Also, every user of Unix, of OS X, so on, knows that less is more, and Master Yoda keeps telling us that simplicity leads to happiness, or something like this. Fuck, my Yoda voice really sucks, sorry about this. So, in the spirit of simplicity, we are going to drop some stuff. I'm going to say drop right now, but because we are very careful and responsible team, first we are going to deprecate them, and then we are going to drop them, so there are going to be no immediate backwards incompatibilities. Because, believe it or not, we can just gradually phase out things. We don't need to do it suddenly. So, let's start with the removal process. First, we're going to remove the absolutely useless bits of Ruby. For loops. Have you written code like this? Nobody admits, right? We're killing them because everybody uses each. Autoload. I believe that nobody has used autoloads for at least 11 years now, so we are finally removing them from the language. Begin and end. The majority of you don't know what this does, but basically it allows you to write code that doesn't have natural flow of control. I know. It's absurd, right? We can write it like this. Bye-bye, begin and end. We hardly knew you. We don't really miss you. And yes, we have a kernel at exit callback in case you really want to register something at exit. Flip-flops. Everybody's favorite feature. I have noticed that the only use case of flip-flops usage in the wild is direct copy-paste of an example of their usage from the Pickaxe book, which looks like this, because I copy-pasted it myself. I don't believe that one use case warrants a special support in the language, so we are finally saying them goodbye. Block comments, a feature that you've probably never heard of, but there is a second way to write comments in Ruby. It looks like this, and it is very cool in theory if it wasn't implemented in the worst possible manner for the most obscure reasons. So they must be placed at the very beginning of a line, which means that if you write code like this, this is going to be a compilation error. If you write it like this, it looks ridiculously ugly. So nobody uses them, they are completely forgotten, and I believe it is time to part ways with them as well. I know that the talk is getting very, very depressing, but I'm certain that a good amount of Ruby karaoke afterwards is going to cheer us up. Character literals. They used to be something useful before Ruby 1.9, but now they're just basically an alias for single character strings. So we are just removing them because we can write single character strings. Safety levels. That's a tough subject because I know that none of you probably ever use them. But it makes it really easy for me to tell you that this is a feature that never functioned properly. It complicated the VM, and I really like removing useless, complicated features. That there is a lot you can read about safety levels and why it's a bad idea to use them, why it's a good idea to delete this from memory and from your minds in general. Charlie is the world's foremost expert on this. If you buy him a beer, he's going to tell you all the nitty-gritty details. Refinements, we are removing them, yes. Now, let's not stop. This was just the truly useless stuff, but we've got more ground to cover. Now we are starting to remove the redundant stuff because I believe that there are way too many ways to do some things in Ruby, and I'll show you a few examples. Phew, I didn't know I wrote so many slides. Let's start with some core library method aliases. Basically, we have an alias for all of the collection methods and an alias for race as well. And this causes so much confusion because many newcomers to the language are convinced that those are different methods and there is some subtle nuance to their usage that is privy just to the masters of Ruby. They know it, the others don't. There are historical reasons for this, in which I won't go into, but I really do believe that we need to settle down on something. And I really wonder, we have so many aliases, but select, which is filter in 9 out of 10 programming languages, except Ruby. Here is fine though, kind of strange. So we are going to settle down on this. Map, reduce, find, filter, format, length, phrase, for the benefit of the humankind and Ruby in particular, Rubists in particular. Yes, this means farewell to fail because in Ruby we do not tolerate failure. Procs, another favorite subject of mine. Do you know that procs do not have arity checks, do not have local returns? If you return from the body of a proc, you're actually returning from the outer scope, unlike in lambdas, which have arity checks, return from their scope. And I've always wondered, do we really need them? Because every other language has just lambdas, and they're getting by just fine. I've also watched many series of Highlander, and I've learned that there can be only one. So yes, procs are gone. Lambdas forever. Single quoted string literals. This is everybody's favorite topic for discussion. You know, at conferences, I usually hide from people and I stay under fake name because everybody comes to me and says, how do you feel about single versus double quoted string literals? And honestly, I don't give a fuck. But people truly believe that I do. And they make arguments for single quote string literals, for double quote string literals. I get it, people, but I believe that there was a design mistake in the language to include the two of them, so I'll just remove ones, preferably the single quoted string literals, just because we've wasted so much time bike shedding. I believe that we would be at version 7 of the language if we didn't have single quoted string literals and we didn't spend so much time talking about them. I truly do. I also think that we overdid it on the percent something literals, which nobody knows. So I have been programming in Ruby for about 12 years, and I've never used %s, %x. I've used the others infrequently. I really don't understand why you need a literal syntax for an array of words or array of symbols. I honestly don't. It sounds so confusing and strange. I think that the only that are useful are %r, %q, small, upper. You tell me what they mean, if you know. But I think that we can simplify it here. And now I'm going to show you why. In the beginning, I told you I'm very excited to be here. And as any programmer, I do not have emotions. I have just code. So I decided to show you my emotions through code. Yes. This diversity that we have in Ruby forces us to make many, many decisions every day, every hour, every moment. And decision making is very hard. I don't know about you, but yesterday I was struggling for 1 hour when I was wondering whether I want Palinka or whiskey. And this is a simple choice compared to any programming decision you have to make. So if you can delete some of the programming decisions and simplify your life, why not do it? Are all of those options really worth our while? I don't believe so. Let's stop the bike shedding and focus on what matters. Amen. We are not done with Ruby 4. We have more ideas. We actually plan to fix some broken stuff in Ruby. Like, for instance, some really odd things. You know that ampersand, ampersand, and pipe, pipe have different levels of precedence. Ampersand, ampersand binds stronger than pipe, pipe, which is pretty much what you have in any programming language. But and or have the same precedence. Why? There are also so many news floating around in Ruby APIs. My favorite example, you upcase a string non-destructively, you get the string result. You upcase it destructively if there are no modifications. If the string is already upcase, you get a nil. Why? Do I really care that no changes were applied? And when is returning nil ever a good idea? That's why we need crazy operators like safe navigation, because we wrote so many bad APIs. And operators like the safe navigation proliferate the creation of more bad APIs. I think that we should really stand up to the mistakes we made and just delete the safe navigation operator and fix the bad APIs, but they're just me. They're just me. Another favorite example of mine, the zero method returns true and false, the non-zero returns nil and 1. I have to tell you that my work on Robocop has exposed me to every quirk, word, and idiosyncrasy in Ruby. And probably I'm the most depressed developer in the entire Ruby community. That's why I drink so much and I rant so much. But if you receive the complaints that I receive, you would understand me. So why? Let's fix this. Mutable strings. Even JavaScript got this right. Seriously. It's clearly a bad idea. Reassignable constants. Let me spell this out for you. Reassignable constants. It's absurd. She agrees. Class variables. A feature that you learn about in a book, in a blog post, something, and then they tell you, never use this. So I believe that we should either fix this or remove it, preferably remove it. Poorly named methods. So we have aliases for so many things that are completely pointless, but why not fix something meaningful? For instance, I have always wondered why the method which prints something to standard out with a new line is named puts, when the counterpart method is named print, but there is no print line. We have puts and print, no print line. I'd use an alias here, call something print line, deprecate the other thing, not break absolutely anything in the process, and advance humanity forward. That's just me. Defined. Something that looks like a Boolean method and maybe returns true and false, but actually returns either a string or a nil, but never a Boolean. Kind of strange. Yeah, she agrees. She's an expert Ruby developer. Enumerable include. So, I don't know. Bulgarian is my native language and I don't know English very well. But somebody would say that this is an excellent opportunity to alias a method, but I don't know. Kernel %, a method with a very intention-revealing name. How many of you know what this does? Oh, so many. So basically this is a way to format a string. But you can do it like this, which is another name that I don't like. You can do it like this, which is kind of nicer. And little known fact, in Ruby there is actually a method format, at least it was little known before EuRuKo started complaining about it. But yeah, tell me, in what universe would you prefer kernel % over kernel format? That's a great opportunity to deprecate some aliases, move humanity and Rubyism forward. Maybe, just maybe. Per-style global variables. Oh. I don't know what this means. But load path means something. What is this? No idea. I'm trying to contrast right now the default names of some per-style global variables in Ruby with their human readable names defined in the English library. JRuby defines the English library aliases by default because they value your sanity, and so does the team behind Ruby4, so we are going to do it as well. And we are not going to break any backward compatibility in the process. And, oh, Ruby has global variables? That sounds bad because even Java doesn't have global variables. That things don't look good. They really don't. But it seems we have some time to talk about the future of the standard library. And I hope that's a very bright future. Let's see what we know there. The Ruby standard library is a ghetto, an article by a famous Ruby developer, the creator of Sidekick. Let's take a look. According to Mike Perham, the Ruby standard library is plagued by a ton of legacy code, often last updated between 2000 and 2003. I wasn't the best mathematician, but I think this is 14 years, rather long. He claims that there are some horrible APIs in Ruby, and he has an example. There are really a ton of libraries that I don't know why are in Ruby to begin with. DRB, RxML, RSS, Rinda, Webrick, XML, libxml. I think that just relying on his opinion wouldn't be fair, so I decided to ask some people who follow me on Twitter what are the parts of the standard library that they dislike and why. And I got surprisingly some responses. Xavier Noria from the Rails core team doesn't like NetHTTP, nothing new. Aaron Cruz, the leader of the Vienna Ruby hackers, doesn't like NetHTTP. I sense a pattern here. Ben Lovo doesn't like timeout RB because it's a broken S. Such a British gentleman. Eric Michaels Ober seems to dislike many things. I'll just mention one. So some new features get introduced to the language, like keyword arguments, which are really awesome, but the internal Ruby libraries are rarely updated to leverage those features. And even this causes slight compatibility issue. You have to have a conditional check when you're invoking some methods, or you can just write a wrapper in your library. I think that if Ruby itself doesn't show people proper Ruby code design, we are never going to learn, at least a vast majority of us, because for many people, the things that are in Ruby core are like the word of God, the word of maths, it's the same thing, right? There are many improvements that you can make, and yeah, Eric is very bitter, so he complains about a lot of stuff for good reasons and more. You should read this when I share the slides. But the important takeaways is that in Ruby 4 we are going to adopt the following strategy. We are going to move everything that we consider important, super important, like set and so on, to the core library. I don't know how many people differentiate between the core and the standard library. One is the things that you get without requiring anything. The other you have to require. Some of them ship with Ruby, some are gamified. It's really a mess. So we are going to clean it up. We are going to remove absolutely everything that we are quite certain is not used. And this is going to be some third-party gems. And we are going to modernize absolutely everything else and, call it the one true standard library that's truly awesome and deep and profound. But wait, there's more. Or you don't want more. So we are going to also announce a formal language specification and an official compatibility test suite, which everybody who wants to develop another Ruby is going to be able to run. And we are going to relinquish the rights to call Ruby the one true runtime. Ruby is just a language. A runtime is just a runtime. I don't want some runtime to be favorized. What is the word? Help me out. Canonical? Yes. There shouldn't be a canonical runtime. There should be many Ruby runtimes that behave exactly the same. We are going to have a very open collaboration with JRuby, Rubinius, everybody who is running an alternative Ruby implementation. We are going to decide on the features together, and we would never accept a feature which we know is going to be problematic for other runtimes, because we really care about the broader community. And we are actually going to start announcing roadmaps for the development of Ruby. Right now you're getting surprise random commits unless you're following the development super closely, but now we are going to try to do more, do it better, share with the community in advance what we plan to work on, get some initial input. We plan to run yearly surveys, the state of the Ruby community, where there will be questions like what are the top 3 features that you want to see in the next release of Ruby? And I promise that we are going to listen to you, because Ruby is not for me, it's for you. And I believe that it's time to wrap it up, because I'm near the end of the time box. I believe you probably wonder when this amazing Ruby 4 is going to be released. I have a sad news with you, to share with you. Ruby 4 will likely never happen, and this makes me feel sad, maybe some of you. But there is an upside. Ruby 4 is probably going to happen around 2048, because such a round year deserves a new Ruby release, right? And I also like to share my personal belief that Ruby 4 is in a way here even now. I think that JRuby embodies the spirit of Ruby 4. I think that Opal, the crazy Ruby to JavaScript compiler, embodies this as well. Yes, there is a way to get rid of JavaScript, to get rid of CoffeeScript, and to be truly happy and writing Ruby everywhere, but many people don't know about this project. I believe that Ruby Motion is part of the future of Ruby, a way to write native Android and iOS applications in the language that you love and enjoy. But people are Rails. Okay. Okay. I believe that other languages also embody the spirit of Ruby. Crystal was an effort to preserve the beauty of the language, adding some of the widely requested features and tackling the speed issue. I believe that Clojure is one of the most exciting and interesting languages, and even if you never write any Clojure code in production, spending some time with it is really going to broaden your horizons and make you better Ruby developers overall. The same applies for other languages like Elixir, of course, like Scala, if you feel masochistic. And I'd like to wrap it up with a few more quotes. You know, a favorite writer of mine, William Gibson, and I've never read any of his books, by the way, famously said this: the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. So that's pretty much all from me, or was it? Just give me a moment to remember. Sometimes I have one more thing to share. I know that's cheesy, but Mats yesterday said that Ruby is no longer my project. It's the Ruby community's project, and I really want to see becoming a reality, because him just saying it doesn't mean much, right? But you can make it true. File tickets, send patches, blog about the issues, speak about the issues. Only together we can make Ruby the language that we want, the language that we need, the language that we deserve. Otherwise, I should really learn something about Photoshop. I know. That's all from me. It was an honor to be here. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Enjoy the after party.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.